While we start this one. Bring up the sound a little. Good gardening. My name's David Giles. This is our second class. Our first class had a few technical difficulties due in large part to the fact my satellite dish is not adequate for presentation. Next week I'm getting fiber optic, so that problem will resolve itself. Also having a little trouble getting the tape to fully download for the same, or upload for the very same reason. I just have slow internet out here in the country. Welcome to the high lonesome. But that problem will resolve itself by the second or third class starting next week. At any rate, today we're going to be doing a demonstration first off, starting your own bedding plants. After a few trips to the nursery this time of year, you will discover that the hobby of gardening can run into some money. I, for one, like gardening on the cheap, so I'm going to discuss and demonstrate a few helpful tips on starting your own bedding plants, keeping down the cost. This can begin as early as February or as late as the end of April and still meet a spring planting deadline. Even seed is sometimes overpriced, in my opinion, but buying a lot of established plants can run into hundreds of dollars. One thing to note, if you have old seed, don't throw it away. Seed in packages, if not wet and stored away from rodents or bugs, can last many years. It may not germinate quite as well when purchased, but it will still germinate in large percentages. I keep a storage box of old seed, and I've successfully germinated packages of it as old as 20 years old. The older it is, the less comes up, but why throw it away if any of it's going to germinate? Keeps the cost down again. In my box, I have packages of old flowers, some of which are from all the way back to around 2014. Cabbages, pumpkins, melon, cucumbers, lots of tomato plants. I even saved plants that I used in the previous year's gardening. You reuse that seed. There's no reason that if the plant bolts and makes seed, you can't store it and save it for next year. Now, hybrids won't breed true the second year. Many types of tomatoes especially are hybrid, but they'll still make a nice tomato. Usually, if you have several kinds growing, you make your own hybrid. Something unusual will come up the next year. Today, we're going to be planting tomatoes, which is what we're speaking of. I bought several varieties here. Don't know if you can see this package from that far away. These are cherry tomatoes. I also have some Rutgers. And my all-time favorite is the Honeycomb Hybrid. Now, when you're selecting tomatoes, remember the tobacco family. Tobacco has quite a number of members that we use in gardening, which include hot peppers, regular peppers, potatoes, eggplant, and a weed called pokeweed, as well as the tobacco plant. All of these can spread funguses amongst each other. And of course, the pokeweed is notorious for being a carrier because it's a wild plant and is partially immune to those funguses that will kill off or greatly damage your tomato plants. When you're buying a tomato, you want to look for on the label something that says disease resistant or VF or VFT. VF and VFT stand for different kinds of funguses. Fusarium, verticulum, and tobacco mosaic specifically. There's about 5 funguses out there, and there's only 1 or 2 tomato plants that are actually resistant to them all. But a good rule of thumb is if it's a small tomato, it's closer to wild and therefore less likely to get funguses. I like to plant no bigger than medium-sized tomatoes anyway, because if you get the really big beefsteak, they look beautiful, but you don't get very many of them. Along come the hornworms and everything else. They start munching on them before you get an opportunity to harvest them ripe. So if you get smaller varieties of tomatoes, you'll get a much larger yield and it's more disease resistant. A couple of other helpful hints of items to get when you're planting. A granular slow release fertilizer. I don't have the package for this. This was a special blend I got back east several years back of IBDU, which stands for isobutadiene diurea, which is quite a mouthful, but it's the best fertilizer on the market. And so I've kept this as precious as gold because it lasts for 6 months. It feeds a little at a time and hardly burns the plant, and it doesn't pollute. It's the big advantage of it is it feeds and doesn't pollute, which hardly any fertilizer, organic or inorganic, can make claim. But the slow releases that last 6 months can make that claim. IBDU is not the only one, but it's the best one. So I have a little of that for the planting. Also, whenever I water, I like to add a little bit of fish fertilizer. It has a low nitrogen content and it has lots of micronutrients. The Indians knew this. They always planted a fish underneath each of their corn, and it helped the plants grow much better than unfertilized. So a little of this goes in the water at time of planting as well. A third ingredient I like to put in is a hormone known as gibberellic acid. What it basically is a compost tea. Compost tea is water that's run through some kind of composting material, and it takes the rotting hormone out of that material and passes it on to the seed to help it germinate. This is a concentrated version of that bought commercially, but I used to have a lot of trouble getting peppers to germinate till I started using this. And I went from about a 10% germination rate all the way up to 75%. And that's pretty impressive if you get tired of looking at empty containers that don't have any plant in them after you plant. Also, I recommend if you have one, use an old terrarium or aquarium with a cover on it to start the germination. Plants, when they're germinating, for some reason don't like a lot of moving air. So if you can keep them kind of in a container like that, it'll improve your germination rate. I also think it holds in humidity so they don't dry out quite so quickly. But I have this old terrarium here, and I have a cover for it that I made. And until they come up, that cover stays on it. After they come up, I have to switch over to a grow light. You can try growing plants in windows, but it's not very successful because there's not enough intensity of light. LED lights, however, are a godsend to gardeners. These things are inexpensive and put out full spectrum light. I picked this one up for 14 bucks, and it will start all the plants I need this year at very little cost to electricity as well. Once I put that light on here, I like to take some aluminum, put it over. That helps hold in the heat and moisture, the same way the lid does. So get yourself some aluminum. If you have one, an aquarium. If not, make sure when you buy your pots that you have some kind of plastic cover you can put them under. as far as pots go, I don't like peat moss pots. Peat pots advertise that you don't have to transplant them. You can plant the whole pot directly in the ground with the plant still in it. Well, that's true, but they also don't break down very fast. I've had problems with them continuing to hold their shape and the roots getting bound and the plant never getting any bigger. So I don't like peat pots. Those nice pretty clay pots that everybody buys, well, unless you're really proficient at it, you wind up damaging your root system trying to take the plant out of it because you can't put your thumb under it and push, which is how you best take the plant out of a pot for transplant. So what I buy are these little segmented trays. I like the 2-inch size best because by the time the plant is this tall and it's starting to get root bound, I don't have to have an intermediate container for them to be in before the time I can plant outdoors. So I've got a whole mess of these set up here inside of my aquarium, ready to plant. What do I plant it in? Well, first off, I don't recommend just going out and buying any potting soil. You want to shop around a little bit. The better ones are more expensive, and the ones that are well advertised tend to be pretty poor quality. But what you want to do is not look at the name of the company, but at the label. The label tells you what's in it. This one I bought in particular because it's enhanced with earthworm castings. Also has micotone, I don't know what that is, alfalfa meal, kelp meal, and feathered meal. But it's not all ground up clippings. It's not all shredded wood that's been turned into a mulch. It's not whatever trash that they could find, which is what many of the potting soils are. So you want to start with a good potting soil. Let's open this bag up. And now I'm going to spend a couple of minutes here filling up the pots. I don't fill them more than about 3/4 of the way full because I want to put the seed directly on top of that and then finish filling them on top of the seed. So bear with me a minute while I fill all these up with dirt. I find any place that's indoors where the temperature is regulated a good place to keep them. Just don't forget to water them daily or whenever the soil starts to dry out. You don't want the soil to ever get fully dry until the plant is established. Then you can cut back on the watering stuff. But to get them started, they need to be constantly wet. So keep them in a place where you can keep an eye on them. Some people ask me, do plants grow better with music? It can't hurt. And if nothing else, gardening is better with music. There are a lot of myths about plants out there, though, and I tend to suspect that them listening to music is probably one of them. Okay, so I've got them all at about 3/4 full. Another good thing to have if you're planting multiple things in the same area, or some kind of marker for the different kinds of plants that you're putting out. If you don't have pre-made markers that you can write on, just take toothpicks, color them different colors, and then have a code chart somewhere that tells you what they are. Because when they all come up, they're going to look alike. If you want to, say, have all rows of one plant, then you won't know one from another if you don't mark them first. So I have these little plastic markers that I've saved over the years, reused. I don't always have the same product every time, but if you just change the color and remember what color you planted to, it doesn't really matter how it's marked. So I have some yellow ones, I have some red ones, and that looks like about all I have in the way of different colors at the moment. But I have some that are marked. Oh wait, I have some green ones. So I can plant 3 different colors without confusing myself. Okay, my favorite tomato, the Honeycomb Hybrid, is going to come first. And I always save my packages. I try not to use any more seed than necessary, because at $1.95 or $2.95 for 15 seeds, I want to save as many of those seeds as possible. In this case, there's not that many in a pack. So let's see how far I go. We want to take 1 seed for each container. Don't put 2 if you can help it. And I put them out here in the trays. Now, some of you may be old hand at this, and this seems like kind of a waste of your time, but you probably didn't know something about this lesson, such as the hormone that helps. I didn't meet too many people who knew about that stuff. I didn't know about it myself, even though I'd been gardening for 35 years until I worked in a nursery. Even some of the guys on the radio didn't seem to know very much about the stuff, but it really does work well. So I definitely recommend you look into getting some sprouting hormone if you can find some. You might have to order it online. A lot of nurseries these days are also woefully ignorant of things that you're learning in this class. You'll be able to tell the nursery things they don't know if you take the whole class. Okay, so I got the first set put in. I'm gonna go ahead and put the marker on so I don't lose my place after I switch seeds. In this case, I'm a few markers short, so I'll just mark where I stopped, and I'll mark them with toothpicks later. Okay, so that's the first package. Second package I'm going to plant are Burpee's Early Pick, which is a VF hybrid, meaning that it's Fusarium and Verticulum fungus tolerant. It's also a medium-sized tomato, one that I'd recommend from Berkey, excuse me. It doesn't really matter which company you go with. Again, reading the label is what counts, not the fanciness of the product. Okay, these seeds are a little bigger. It'll be easier for me to see putting in. If you do accidentally get 2 in there, don't worry about it, but they grow far better if they're 1 to a pot. That way they're not competing for resources. I feel a little like Johnny Tomato Seed here. Since I'm only planting 3 styles today, I'm going to take up about half the remaining space with these and then switch to a 3rd variety. Okay. I still have a few seeds left in my hand. What do I do with them? I carefully put them back in the package, and I will use them again next year. This actually is last year's seed, but I bet you I still get 100% germination. We'll find out later in a later class how many of them sprouted out of that lot. Let me put in some markers real quick. Again, this helps you remember what you planted. Oops, over here. course, you probably aren't doing this along with me at home, but because this show is being taped, you can not furiously write down notes. One of the problems I experienced yesterday with my slow internet is uploading yesterday's class. I'm getting fiber optics in another week. All these classes will be posted by then. In the meantime, hang tight. I have live out in the country, and unfortunately, until recently, did not have an option to another kind of internet except HughesNet. Okay, those are marked. And our third variety today is going to be sweetie tomatoes. These are not marked to have resistance to blight, but they are cherry tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes are always closer to wild, therefore they tend to naturally fight off fungus better. This package costs $2.17. But I like cherry tomatoes for another reason. They're the perfect size for salads. And if you want to put them on a hamburger, you just cut several of them in half. Okay, I'm taking out a small number of them. Okay, rest go back in here. They also say organic on the label. I think that's kind of a misnomer. What seed isn't organic? What they're really saying is they were organically grown without pesticides. How much pesticide can be in a seed? I mean, even if the plant was soaked with pesticides when it was growing, by the time it makes seed, there's not enough pesticide in there to do anything. So I don't pay for the word organic. If it's the only kind they have in that variety and I want that variety, sure, I'll buy it. But as far as it being a requirement for seed, no. Okay, is organic grown melon at your store? That's a different story. But for seed, they're all organic, okay? Whether they were grown organically or not. Okay, so all of these are marked, except for a few where I ran out of tags, which I will fix later with toothpicks. So now we cover over carefully, not to knock over. And according to the instructions, it's about 1/4 of an inch of dirt that you want over each seed. Doesn't have to be exact. They'll find their way to the surface, don't worry. Tomatoes are pretty darn hardy. I've grown tomatoes in the middle of cracks in the sidewalk accidentally. So if they can do that, they can certainly handle the pristine, lush conditions they're getting when you plant them on your pots. Other things you can plant, I would recommend peppers. They're hard to start though. I don't recommend things like radishes or carrots. And cucumbers I have trouble with because they hate being transplanted. Those I tend to plant in the ground directly. You can't buy those as nursery plants. A lot of times they go into root shock and transplant. So some seed works better directly planted in the ground. But certainly all the members of the tobacco family, including tobacco, would be better if you start them indoors. Tobacco, by the way, is fun to grow. Hummingbirds love it. Makes a good insect repellent. And but they are hard to start. They're very fine. You have to really hold your mouth right. So now I'm going to tamp all these down just a little bit so that the seed doesn't float all over the place when I add water. Okay. Doesn't need a whole lot of tamping. You certainly don't want to compact it, but you want the soil to snug up nice next to the seed. That keeps it from moving around or winding up on the surface. And later, after you've watered, if you do see a seed that's floated to the surface, throw a little more dirt on top of it. It won't hurt it. They need to be about 1/4 of an inch deep. Okay, next step, we want to water them. Now, some things you water and some things you don't. Granular fertilizers, you do not have to put in the water mix. For one thing, they don't dissolve quickly. So you take just a little pinch. It doesn't have to be more than a few grains in each one. Sprinkle it like you're adding a hot spice to your soup. You want to put in just a tiny pinch. It's not going to burn the plant if you get the right fertilizer. If you wind up getting that stuff that looks like Smurf colored blue crystals, that's wrong. It's fast release. And if you get a liquid fertilizer, unless it's fish emulsion, that's the wrong stuff. You want a slow release, 3 or 6 month fertilizer. Those don't burn, they don't pollute. If I had one thing I want you to learn in this class, is how to use good fertilizer. Help you save the environment, keep your plants healthy, and everybody will be happy. Even if it is industrial rather than organic, it's less polluting. I've done the tests myself. I and my son spent a whole season doing a plant growing project to discover what fertilizers pollute water fastest. And the liquids and the blue crystal ones are bad. Even a lot of the granular ones aren't good. You want to avoid 20, 20, 20, 10, 10, 10, and 15, 15, 15 like the plague. Those have been illegal in Europe now for 30 years because they release half their energy when you water them, and then in 30 days they release their other half of their energy, and there's no food in between. Farmers love this stuff. You can hardly find anything out here in Missouri other than that stuff, and it's terrible. I spend a lot of time talking to farmers telling them, don't buy that stuff. Get the high tech. It may be more expensive, but you only have to use it once every 3 or 6 months instead of every month or every other month, as you do with the 10, 10, 10, 15, 15, 15, and 20, 20, 20. So we pour a little fish emulsion in our water. You can't really burn with this stuff, but it doesn't take a lot of it. After all, these are just baby plants and they can't eat much. But the nitrogen level's real low in this stuff, so it's not going to hurt anyway. Then, the sprouting hormone. Again, there's nothing in it that can burn the plant, so you can use that as liberally as you like. I don't want to use too much of it because it's hard for me to find. All of that's in my water now. Give it a good shake up. We've already put in our slow release nitrogen fertilizer, granular, and gently, and I say gently because you don't want to overdo it, put a little bit of water in each of those little containers. You're not trying to flood it, you're just trying to get it wet. And it might not look wet at first, but it's getting there. Later in the season, we'll be taking some of our gardening classes outdoors. Couldn't do it today, it's certainly raining. And at the moment, my garden looks more like a weed pit than it does a garden. Because at the end of the year, I totally fell behind on weeding. My girlfriend beat me out on that account by using ground cover. This year, ground cover is going down. Is it time? Well, I better hurry. I've been given the 2-minute warning. I've been having so much fun, the time's gone by. But that's all right, I'm just about finished. So it's well watered. Don't forget to put your cover back on here and watch for sprouts. When the sprouts come in, then it needs a light. Window light doesn't work, okay? Use a grow light. Thanks for coming to the class today. Next Wednesday, we're going to be back to talking about soil again. Thanks. Good gardening, people. Good day.